Can we please welcome Jon to the stage? Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is a piece of cheese. It's my favourite cheese. It's a blue cheese. It's a piece of Colston Bassett mature Stilton. At the 2013 World Cheese Awards, it was named the best British cheese. It's a king amongst cheeses. It's been made just a few miles up the road from where I work at the Colston Bassett Dairy for well over 100 years. The dairy is only one of 5 dairies in the whole world which is legally allowed to produce Stilton. Fantastic piece of cheese. I wanted to start by asking, even amongst this highly skilled and experienced audience, whether you'd actually ever thought carefully about where a cheese like that comes from. To produce that award-winning Stilton, cows, large, domesticated, grass-eating mammals, are kept on one of 4 dairy farms. Their milk is mechanically harvested from the udder using a milking machine. The udder, a now massively enlarged and distended organ, has evolved from a type of sweat gland. Milk is a form of modified sweat. So we take the modified sweat, the milk, and we coagulate it using an enzyme called rennet, which was originally recovered from the stomach of unweaned calves. The resultant curds, the solid bits, are then fermented anaerobically without air by a bacteria called Lactococcus lactis, and then left to mature and dry for 6 to 7 weeks. 6 to 7 weeks into that process, air is let into the cheese using steel needles, which allows spores of the mould Penicillium roquefortii to mature and grow, giving the cheese its characteristic blue-veined appearance. So to produce that award-winning Stilton, we collect the modified sweat of a large grass-eating animal, we mix it with the stomach contents of a calf, we then allow it to partly decompose and then go mouldy to produce a pungent-smelling solid. Next time you turn your nose up at what other cultures around the world eat, think about the solid lumps of partly decomposed mouldy cow sweat which we eat on crackers. And we've been doing it a long time. The earliest archaeological evidence would suggest we've been producing cheese by basically that method for about 5,500 years. The domestication of farm animals such as the cow about 8,000 to 10,000 years ago remains to this day one of the very cornerstones of the development of modern agriculture, changing our then nomadic hunter-gatherer lifestyles into ones of static communities and hence the rise of settlements and villages. The gradual specialisation, intensification and mechanisation of agriculture, which still continues to this day, freed first a few and then the vast majority of the population from the daily grind of generating enough food to stay alive, allowing specialisation of roles within the community and hence to the rise of towns, cities and eventually modern complex civilisations. Agriculture remains one of the fundamental cornerstones of absolutely everything that we are and have become. We should be very proud of what we do and where we've come from and where we are going to. We just have to get better at projecting that to the general population, who are now incredibly remote from agriculture, because we are now down to roomfuls of people who do this job because you have got so damn good at it. Anyway, I can't talk about cheese forever. I'd like to. Oh, it is fine cheese. It is my favourite cheese. What I would like to do today is talk about some of the work that we've been doing over the last 5 years at the vet school at Nottingham and with wider collaborators. I want to take you through some things. I want to talk about lameness in general. I'm going to put a health warning on this before we start, because I would like you to, first of all, park everything that you think you currently know about lameness, and secondly, be open-minded to some of the things that I'm going to talk about. Because it would be fair to say that our understanding of lameness has lagged a long way behind some of the other diseases that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. We've had a massive vacuum in proper understanding of what is going on with lameness. And I'm going to challenge, and I'm going to throw some stuff out there that is going to be directly contradict a lot of what you think you already know about lameness. I'll be very happy to talk through it and discuss and ask questions at the end. As we go through, if there's any points of clarity, I'm happy to take questions on points of clarity. But if you've got questions in the broader context, please can we save them to the end. So if it's clarity, please stick your hand up or throw some at me, and we can talk as we go. So, lameness. Why should we care? Why should you care? A great big range of things. I'm sure you know much of this. If we look at levels of lameness, both in the UK and in other locations around the world, we are currently in the situation that on the average UK dairy farm, about 1/3 of cows are identifiably lame on any day of assessment. And by lame, I don't mean hopping lame, but I mean identifiably lame at any level of severity. 1 in 3 on the average farm. And that puts us about average with the rest of the developed dairy world. If you look at the numbers from other places around the world, we're about the same level. So don't beat yourselves up about this. This is not something that we particularly need to worry about. It just reflects where we are with dairying, and we'll perhaps talk about why that is as we go along. This is well backed up by the research. We know that lame cows give less milk. It's not as clear as it might be, which we'll talk about in a second. They take longer to get in calf. They are more likely to be cold, and by definition, they're limping because they're uncomfortable, so they're in pain and discomfort. This is probably key, actually, to a lot of what we're going to talk about today. This is 2 lactation curves. It's part of a study that we did about 8-9 years ago, so this is UK commercial cows, but it's worth reiterating it's been repeated in other locations around the world, so this is not anything particularly unusual. That's 2 lactation curves from a research study. And what we've done is reproduce the lactation curves for 2 groups of cows. One group of cows which were never identified as lame at fortnightly mobility scoring for the whole 12 months of the study, and another lactation curve for cows which were ever identified as lame at fortnightly mobility scoring through the study. So you look at that, and this curve here is for the ever lame cows, and this curve here is for the never lame cows. And you look at that and everybody goes, no, you've got that the wrong way around. We haven't. What this says is that lameness is a disease associated with high production. So it is your better cows, your higher yielding cows, which are more likely to become lame. Now, interestingly, what they then tend to do is lose milk and drop back towards somewhere near average for the herd. So lame cows don't become your poor cows, you know that. That's why very often you don't cull them, because they're still giving a lot of milk. But they would have given more milk if they hadn't gone lame. Lameness is a disease associated with high production. It's one of the reasons that we're probably worrying more about this now in the recent couple of decades, because as average yield has gone up, lameness has followed it. Because if high yield is a key risk factor for lameness, as yield goes up, lameness will go up. That was by way of an introduction. What I would like to talk about now is the claw-horn lesions. So the rest of my presentation is going to be talking about the claw-horn lesions. Our group don't work on digital dermatitis. There's some great work going on DD at Liverpool. We do the other side of things. So we do the non-infectious causes of lameness. By the claw-horn lesions, the main things I'm talking about are sole ulcer, sole hemorrhage, and white line disease. Doesn't mean that dermatitis isn't important, it's just not what our team do. So, by way of just some pictures, I'm sure you've all seen these things before. We've got some pictures of sole ulcer and sole hemorrhage. For me, they are basically exactly the same condition. The hemorrhage is just an earlier and milder manifestation of the same condition. So what I've tried to do is put them across from the most severe type presentations through to these milder type lesions. If you pick cows up earlier, when they first go very mildly lame, this is what you see. You see these very mild early hemorrhage lesions. If you leave them, you then see these very end-stage lesions, by which point, personally, you're wasting your time if you're going to try and do anything with them at this point, and we're going to come back to talk about that towards the end. So it's just a great big range of disease from severe through mild. Similarly with white line disease, if you leave them to get really bad, you'll see these straight through to the corium, to the quick, and you might find big abscess pockets and make yourself feel really good because it all goes bang and pus goes everywhere. But again, if you pick these things up early, you don't see these big holes. What you see is hemorrhage in the white line. Those are the earlier, milder manifestations of what is effectively the same condition. These ones over here are end stage. So, white line. Right, this is the first point at which I'm going to start upsetting people. So the historical view, if we talked about these clawhorn lesions, and I was teaching this up until about 7-8 years ago, the historical view went something like this. We overfeed concentrate to high-yielding cows. We give them rumen acidosis, which drops the pH of the rumen. That drop in pH causes the death of bacteria in the rumen. That releases endotoxins, some toxins that travel around the circulation into the foot. That affects blood supply to the foot. We get this disease called laminitis, and from then on in, we see the clawhorn lesions. Unfortunately, that is almost impossible to substantiate in the research evidence. There is very, very, very little that underpins that. It would appear that it was made up based on some not particularly strong evidence with the best intentions to try and explain this disease, and has then percolated through all the textbooks and everything else that has come after it. Personally, as far as lameness is concerned, I have no interest in rumen health at all anymore. That doesn't mean to say that rumen acidosis isn't an important and key disease. It absolutely is. All I'm saying is it's probably not related to lameness. So if that's my starting point, what I would now like to try and do is build up where we think we are as far as the cause of these lesions is concerned. And in order to do that, we need to look at the anatomy of the bovine foot. So, to start with, we've got two key structures. We've got the wall here, and then we've got the sole on the base of the foot. The wall grows from the coronary band up here. It grows downhill 5 to 6 millimeters per month. It takes about 12 months before horn that is being produced today becomes weight-bearing at the sole, at the ground. The sole grows out from the base of the foot. Those two structures are joined together at the white line. The white line is effectively a biological glue junction between the wall and the sole. It's one of the reasons it's an area of weakness. If we look at what goes on inside, if we look at the bony architecture inside, the main structure within the hoof itself is this wedge-shaped bone here, the pedal bone. And if we image it using some good quality modern imaging techniques, you can see this wedge-shaped bone. Here's the hoof capsule, so here's the wall is growing from the coronary band up here, going downhill. Here's the sole here, and the sole is being produced by a line of cells just underneath it here, and the hoof capsule is about there. So this wedge-shaped bone sitting within the hoof capsule. Now what we've done here is we've taken a bandsaw and we've sectioned a foot straight down the middle, and then we've opened it up. So you're seeing a section straight through the middle of the foot, and you're seeing basically exactly the same as we were seeing in this sort of picture here, but in real life. Or not real life. I hope it's not real life. So again, here's the wall. The wall is growing from the coronary band. Here's the sole, and the sole is being produced by a line of cells just about here. That is a terrible place to be sat. Because if you look at the physics of this, and if you look at how a cow stands, all the weight of the cow is bearing down through the leg. So that's the cow standing. That's almost exactly replicating her bony skeleton. So all the weight is bearing straight down through that bone, wedge-shaped bone that sits in the foot. So all the weight of the animal, 600, 700, 800 kilograms when the cow is standing, is borne by that bone. It's just how the physics work. I've just told you that the cells producing the sole sit here. That is an awful, awful place to be sat. You have 3/4 of a ton of cow above you, and for 6 months of the year in the UK situation, and increasingly more time throughout the year, you have concrete below you. That's 7, 8 mils of soft tissue. Those cells are absolutely key. And this is the sort of fundamentals of the underlying why we see these lesions, because what happens is we see crush injuries of these cells here because of the weight of the cow below them and the concrete underneath them. And you can actually see, if you do similar sections on diseased claws, you can actually see this happening. So here's a really nice example of a sole ulcer physically growing out. So the cells are being killed here. Because they're being killed by the pressure, they don't produce the sole. And then we end up with this 5-pence piece size hole where the sole isn't being produced and it grows out. So these lesions are effectively a crush injury of this very thin layer of tissue here. That's the bit we've known all along. The bit we haven't understood, if I'm telling you that acidosis isn't behind it, is what the big risk factors are and what is going on. And over the last 10 years, we've come to understand a lot better about the mechanics of the foot and how it works. And the mechanics of the foot is dependent on 2 key structures. And the 2 key structures are a really strong attachment between this wedge-shaped bone here and the hoof capsule, because we have to hold this bone really, really tightly within the hoof capsule, because all the weight of the animal is bearing down through it. It's called the suspensory apparatus. And secondly is this key structure here, the fat pad. It's a pad of fat that lies underneath the pedal bone within the hoof capsule. And that's what I'd like to spend a little bit of time talking about. I'm very briefly going to tell you about what we understand about the suspensory apparatus. The one thing we know about it is that really strong attachment slackens off at about the time of carving. So it is easier to tear the foot out of the hoof capsule around the time of carving. So we get some problems with that really strong attachment around the time of carving. And we think it's because around time of carving, the reproductive tract has to soften and slacken in order to allow the calf to be born. And that requires some really quite damaging hormones to be released that fundamentally soften all the connective tissues in the reproductive tract. It's why ladies have problems with their backs and symphyses and everything else, because these hormones affect the whole body and everything slackens off because they have to allow birth. But the problem is those hormones also affect the foot and they slacken the attachment within the foot around the time of parturition. If you want to know, fundamentally, one of the reasons why dairy cows become lame a month or 2 after calving, that's one of them. Because everything slackens off around calving, then it takes a month or 2 before the disease is seen. What I'd like to spend a little bit more time talking about is the digital cushion, because this is what a lot of our team have been working on over the last 5 years. The guy who first described this, Christoph Liescher from Zurich University, they did some fantastic work on the fat pad in the foot about 10 years ago, and it went completely unrecognised for quite a while. They described it as the anatomy of it. And you see this sort of, these sections, these cylinders of fat lying underneath the bone in the foot. When Christoph I saw him first present this, he said it is remarkable how much like the gel cushioning in training shoes that looks like. And that's exactly the function we think the fat pad has. So when a sound cow walks, what she does is she strikes heel first and then rolls onto the flat of her foot. Heel first, rolls onto the flat of the foot. And the fat pad functions just to soften that initial concussive blow as the animal strikes. We've got a lot of weight standing on concrete. We need something just to act as a shock absorber. And the fat pad serves that function. It just cushions that initial blow before all the weight of the animal, before all the weight of the animal is transferred onto the wall when we've got those really strong attachments. Then we're good to go again. And you can see it. So if we dissect it out, would you mind just pulling that curtain too? See if we can get it, because we're going to get some pictures. Thank you. If we dissect it out, you can see this fat pad as this yellow fat. So we can dissect out and you see the fat underneath the foot. Equally, if we then run some of these dead feet through a microcomputer tomography, one of the really modern imaging techniques, what we've done is we've picked out the fat component that we can see in that imaging. That's what it looks like. 3 cylinders of fat which lie underneath the pedal bone. And we can see them from a range of different directions. If you want to see it from the bottom, that's what it looks like. So we've got these 3 cylinders of fat underneath the foot acting as a shock absorber. So if you wanted my best guess on what is causing the clawhorn lesions, sole hemorrhage, sole ulcer, and white line disease, it is a triumvirate of three different things. It's these three different areas. It's the suspensory apparatus and the problems with the suspensory apparatus around the time of calving. It's the structure and function of the digital cushion, which we're going to come back to. And it's all the environmental factors that you already know about and are described in all the lameness control programs. So again, something I need to be really clear on here is nothing I am saying makes anything about managing standing time, maximising lying, making cubicle comfort fantastic, avoiding sharp turns, and all those other things. None of those things, I'm not undermining any of that, because that is absolutely key. But what I am doing is adding that the structure and function of the digital cushion is probably key. And if you get the balance of these things wrong, then you will see a lot of disease on farm. So this is like anything. This is about population risk. So let's take us all driving cars. Getting here by car is singularly probably the most dangerous thing that you will do all week. Getting in a vehicle, it's the thing most likely to lead to serious injury or death for most of us. And there's a range of risk factors that affects all of us getting here by car. And they're the quality of your car and its safety classification system. They're whether you drive like an idiot or whether you drive safely. They're whether you put your seatbelt on, and all those other things sum up to everybody's risk. But that doesn't mean to say that the idiot who drove 120 miles an hour here without his seatbelt in a crappy old car is going to die every time. That's not how risk works. It just means that on average, those cows are more likely to end up in problems. And that's what we're saying with all of this risk. Right, structure and function of the digital cushion. This is what we need to get to now, because this is where our work has been going over the last 5 years. I want to explain where we are and what we think you will be needing to do in the future to try and manage lameness. So it's 3 cylindrical bodies of fat. We know that they fully form in the second lactation, so they're not fully formed in first lactation heifers. They contain monounsaturated fat. And the other things that we know about this are that as cows lose body condition score, they mobilize fat from the fat pad. So this effectively just acts like any reserve of fat in the body. So a cow that loses body fat will mobilize it from the abdomen, from the tail head, and all those other locations, but she will also start mobilizing fat from the fat pad in the foot. We also know that cows with thinner cushions are more likely to have claw horn lesions, so sole hemorrhage, sole ulcer, white line disease. That's where we were about 10 years ago, 8 years ago. But the absolute key question in all of this, and somebody has already asked me about this before we've even started today, this becomes the key question, is do lame cows become thin, or do thin cows become lame? And that has been the absolute heart and key question within the research lameness community for about the last 5 years, and it's caused many, many arguments. I'm going to present some work today that I hope will convince you that we're starting to nail this down. So what do we already know? Well, first of all, we need to be clear. We know that lame cows become thin. You know that, I know that. You see these two things together. And it's well supported in the research evidence. Lameness has impacts on nutrition. Lame cows spend fewer visits, make fewer visits to the feed face. The visits they do make to the feed face, they spend less time there. So their dry matter intake is lower. Because their dry matter intake is lower, clearly they're going to lose body condition relative to their peers who aren't lame. So we absolutely already know that lame cows lose body condition. However, we now have this work that demonstrated that there was an association between thinner cows and the thickness of the digital cushion. So we know now that thinner cows have thinner digital cushions. What we haven't known is whether that genuinely leads to cows becoming lame. I'm going to apologise because I'm now going to go slightly techie and scientific. It's only for about 5 minutes. It's very difficult for me not to explain the guts of exactly where we are with the research without going slightly techie. I will try and sum it all up because I appreciate it's going to get hard work, some of this. It's hard work for me sometimes. What I'd like to do is take you through 3 UK studies that have come out of our group and have been published over the last 9 months. And it's going to be a little bit techie, so bear with me. It's only 5 minutes. So the first study is 1 UK herd, 600 cows, 600 cow herd, We had records for 2.5 years, we had lameness treatment records, and we had all the body condition scoring that took place on that farm, and all cows were body condition scored every 2 months. And we looked at the relationship between body condition score and whether they were treated for lameness. And what I've done to try and describe this, because this is all done in really geeky mathematical modelling. That's what we do. It's very sad. We just shut ourselves away and hope that nobody notices too much. But we do these geeky mathematical models to look at the relationship between body condition score and future treatment. So I've laid out a timeline for you. So the timeline is this. This is now. This 30-day block is now. And what the mathematical models allow us to do is look into the past and look at what the cows were doing compared with now in the timeline. Oh, sorry. And so I've put 2 blocks in. That's 0 to 2 months ago and 2 to 4 months ago. Now, a cow that was treated for lameness now in this 30-day block, if she was diagnosed with sole ulcer or white line disease, what the work demonstrated was that she was thin both 0 to 2 and 2 to 4 months previously. So before she was treated for lame, 2 and 4 months previously, she was thin. Her condition score was 2 or less. That implies that the loss of condition preceded the treatment for lameness. Equally, and I'm going to come back to this because another key point for this afternoon, is a cow which was treated for lameness today was at greater risk if she'd been treated previously. I'm going to say this a few times. I think you should consider lame cows in exactly the same way as you do a high cell count cow. A high cell count cow, you know already intuitively, is more likely to get mastitis again in the future. We now know the same is true for lameness. A lame cow who goes lame once is much more likely to go lame again in the future. Study 1. So we demonstrated that before they were treated for lameness, they were thinner. Second study, again, these are all commercial UK herds. This is 4 herds, 800 cows in total, 770 cows. They were mobility and body condition scored every 2 weeks by a single person for 18 months. So now this is just mobility score. This is not about treatment for lameness, it's about mobility score. And again, we did the same geeky modelling. Slightly different timeline now. That's the line today. And what we're looking at is the next 15 days. So if you look forward for the next 2-week period from today, comparing with what the cow was doing previously. And that's calving at the end of the timeline. So if a cow is non-lame today, and she was thin at calving, what the work says is she is much more likely to become lame in the next 2 weeks. So a cow that was thin at calving is much more likely to become lame in the next 2 weeks. And equally, if she's lame today and she was thin at calving, she is much more likely to stay lame. So this works in both directions. So cows which are thin at calving are more likely to become lame, and if they are lame, they're less likely to recover. Similarly, cows which lost body condition score from calving and they're non-lame today are more likely to become lame in the next 2 weeks. And if they're lame today and they've lost condition score from calving, they are more likely to stay lame. So losing condition is also a risk. And then the third study, also UK, this is SRUC, the Royal Crichton herd, one of the most intensively monitored herds in the whole country. We took their exceptionally rich data set. We had 724 cows over 8 years. Mobility, they are literally mobility condition scored, body weighted to death, literally, in the Royal Crichton. We've got huge amounts of data, and again, it allows us to look at that modelling. So it's another data set. Again, we've got exactly the same thing. This is today. This is previous. This, for me, really nails it down, because the people we try and get these papers published with still go, yeah, but you still don't know that it's not that there's a nagging underlying lameness which is making them lose weight. This is the killer one for me. If we now look at the very first lifetime lameness event, so the very first time a cow is identified as lame, and then we look back at a condition score history, they were more likely to be thin. And that is relative, that's risk that is incremental. So we absolutely saw it for the really thin cows, but the slightly fatter cows also were more likely to have their first lameness event in the future. I really think we've got this nailed down. I won't bother with that. Again, it's exactly the same as before, so we're finding the same things all the time. Cows which lost body condition score 4 weeks after calving were more likely to have a lameness event in the future. So I genuinely now, hand on heart, think, as far as I'm concerned, we have this nailed down. That's 3 studies, all saying the same things, all 3 from dairy herds in the UK, managed by standard UK systems. And the whole thing is saying that loss of body condition score makes you more likely to become lame in the future. We need to do some more stuff on this. Personally, I think this potentially has the potential to become quite game-changing in how we think about controlling lameness on farm, because our work suggests that managing body condition score loss in early lactation through to peak yield is a key control mechanism for lameness prevention. So if you can manage the extent of the loss and the rate of the loss, you will minimize the number of cows which will go on to become lame. That really is right at the front edge of where we are. Those 3 papers have only been published in the last 9 months. I'd love to be able to put some of the really practical stuff on this. It's coming. But what I would say is that, for me, is how you should think about the clawhorn lesions. It's a combination of the suspensory apparatus and calving. We can't do much about that other than looking after cows in the fresh cow period. We need to think about condition score management and, of course, all those other things in your environment which are adding up to the risk for lameness. I'll run you through what we hope to add to this over the next 6 to 12 months. One of my extremely dedicated PhD students is just about finishing up a longitudinal study where he has followed 180 cows throughout lactation. He's picked all 4 feet of those 180 cows up every 6 weeks, and we can scan the digital cushion through the base of the foot using an ultrasound scanner. And we can actually measure the thickness of this digital cushion, and we can track that against the body condition score of the cow, the body weight of the cow, and their future risk of lameness. That really will nail it down for me, but as far as I'm concerned, I think we're pretty good to go as it is. And then the other thing we've been doing is we've been taking the cull cow feet from the SIUC herd, which we know everything about, and we've been imaging them through these really high-end imaging suites where we can look at all the structures in the foot, the bones and the fat pad and all those other bits and pieces. And that allows us to look at what is going on in the foot. Because the other strong message, which I've already alluded to, is that one of the main risk factors for lameness is being lame previously. What we think is happening is when a cow goes lame for the first time, she permanently and irretrievably damages some of the structures inside the foot. Once those structures are damaged, there's nothing you can do about it. That makes that cow much more likely to go lame again in the future. That makes preventing lameness absolutely key, and treating lame cows the very minute they first go mildly lame also absolutely key. Okay, just to finish up, I want to take you through the second part of the work we've been doing over the last few years, and that's looking at the treatment of these feet and how we treat these cows. Because again, what I love about working in the lameness field is it's genuinely quite frightening how little we know. If you start scratching beneath the surface and looking at the lameness research, we know very little about lameness. We really do. It's quite frightening. And our starting point was this. We've got 2 diseases, lameness and mastitis. Both cost your businesses huge amounts of money. Both are 2 of the top problems that you face on farm, but they are treated extremely differently on farm. With mastitis, we have a disease which is treated within hours of it first showing any signs, and it's treated with treatments which have been demonstrated experimentally to work. That was our starting point, because if you look at the lameness side of things, that isn't where we are. So, for those of you, I'm sure you're all familiar now with the Dairy Co-Mobility Scoring System, but I just thought we'd run through it as a starting point because it does just inform a little bit of what we're going to do. Score 0 are the sound cows. So a score 0 cow walks with a relaxed, even fluid gait. She's relaxed in her head. She's got a flat back. She's perfectly happy. Long, even strides. The hind feet fall where the front feet have just come from. a perfectly sound cow. A score 1 cow on the dairy ecosystem are not sound, but we can't pick a leg that's lame. So here we have a score 1 cow. She's walking what I would say a little bit short, so the hind feet aren't really reaching forward. She's got a small arch to the back. She looks a little bit more circumspect as she walks around the corner. But I can't hand on heart look at that cow and pick a leg which is lame, the score 1 cow. The score 2 cows, so this is the point at which we can first identify a cow as having a lame limb. And it will be very subtle and very often very mild. So at this point, we've got a slight arch to the back, and we've got a disparity in the limb speed on the hind feet, bearing in mind most cows go lame on their hind feet. So this is a mildly lame cow, and she's mildly lame on the left hind. The right hind is coming through a little bit faster. She's trying to get off that left hind as quick as she can. That's a very mild lameness, but we can pick those cows out if we look carefully. And finally, the score 3 cows. These are the hopping, obviously lame cows. Nobody needs any time or training to spot the score 3 cows. These are the big arch back, the slow, the short strides. That's just a hopping lame cow. Now, one of the problems that our work has demonstrated over the last few years when we talk to you guys about the treatment of cows on farm is it appears like most of the effort as far as identification and treatment of lame cows is targeted down at these score 3 cows for very good and obvious reasons. They're the badly lame cows, clearly they're right in your face, they're easy to spot, they need treating. However, that is a country mile away from where we are with mastitis. To get to this point, they all will have gone through score 2, and it's probably taken them 2, 4, 6 weeks to get to this point. If I said to you, the next cow that you have come into the parlour with mastitis, what I would like you to do is leave it for 4 weeks before you do anything with it, you'd think I was clinically insane. But that is currently one of the challenges we have on farm with treatment of lameness. The second big problem is how should we treat these feet? Because if I go to the research literature and I look for evidence as to how I should be advising you how to treat these feet, there is nothing there. All the treatments for lame cows have been made up by experts working in the field with the best intentions. I'm not criticising them in any way, and I'm not saying what we have been doing is wrong. But what I am saying is we don't know what the best treatments are. If you went into the doctor and with disease X, and he or she looked at you and said, well, I'm going to give you this. I've no idea if it'll work. There's no evidence behind whether it'll work, but why didn't you just give it a go? You'd think the doctor was mad, but that is the situation we're in when we treat lame cows. Millions of cows are treated for these diseases all over the world every year. It's never been tested. So what we've been doing is we've been spending some of your levy money. This is dairy co-funded research, as much as our research currently is. We went to 5 commercial cows, and we mobility scored them every 2 weeks using the Dairy Co mobility scoring system. The only thing we do different is we do divide it up a little bit. So we divide the scoring system up into 2A and 2B and 3A and 3B because it helps us with the research. The mobility scoring was repeated every 2 weeks on those 5 commercial farms for 12 months. Animals were included in the study if they met the following criteria. They had a new case of lameness, a score 2 or a score 3, in a single foot, which followed 2 non-lame scores. So we picked them out as soon as they went lame. They couldn't have had antibiotics or anti-inflammatories. The lame foot was carefully examined, and cows were excluded if they had foul in the foot or active dermatitis or growths. So we're only interested in cows with clawhorn lesions, or if they had a lesion on both claws, because we were going to block these cows. Cows which were included all received a 5-step therapeutic trim. So they all received a standard trim, applicable to whatever lesions they presented with. So they all got a standard trim. Once they'd received that trim, they were randomly allocated into one of 4 treatment groups. The first group got nothing else, so they just got the trim. The second group got a trim, plus we applied a block to the sound claw. The third group got a trim, plus a 3-day course of anti-inflammatories, and we used ketoprofen because it had a license for lameness treatment at the time. And group 4 got the trim, the block, and the 3-day course of anti-inflammatories. All the animals were rechecked after a week. Cows which had received a block as part of the treatment, if the block wasn't present, we put it back on. But only for those that had initially been treated with a block. After 4 weeks, all the blocks were removed from all cows. And after 5 weeks, all the cows were mobility scored by an assessor who had had nothing else to do with the study. So Juliana had no idea how the cows had been treated. Her only job was to go in and score the cows 5 weeks after treatment. So she was what we call a blind observer. Right, I want a show of hands. So that is what's called a randomized, positively controlled clinical trial. That's how human medicines are tested. Actually, we then repeat those many, many times to get a medicine through, but this is a start. There's 2 ways we can look at the results. We can look at the percentage which are sound after 5 weeks, so score 0, or we can look at the percentage which are non-lame after 5 weeks, score 0 or score 1. I want a show of hands from everybody. Nobody is allowed to duck out of this. You have to take a punt. You have to guess with a show of hands. We'll go through the groups one by one, which group of cows you think did best. So hands up, who thinks cows in group 1 did best, trim only. Hands up who thinks group 2, trim and block. That's where my vote was before we started. Who thinks group 3, trim and 3 days of non-steroidals? And who thinks group 4, trim, block and non-steroidals? That's what we found. Cows which received all treatments were nearly twice as likely to be sound after 5 weeks. This group did much, much better. I was really quite surprised at that. That's not what I expected to find, but that is it's the beauty with this sort of study. That is what it is what it is. That's what we found. If we look at it as score 0 or 1, this group still does best. It's not quite, for the geeky amongst you, this isn't quite significant, this difference. That one is highly significant. This one isn't quite, but clearly it all goes in the same direction and suggests the same thing. We are literally just, be very clear. These cows were we picked them up as soon as they went, score 2 lame. The vast majority of them were what we score 2A, so the mildest category. It's a really important health warning on this study. We've just repeated the study. We're just finishing it up now, so I can't officially report the results for you. We've just repeated basically exactly the same study, but this time we've only treated cows which we have identified as lame for at least 4 weeks. And very often they've been lame for longer. The farms are allowed to carry on doing exactly what they wanted. We just scored them, and then we picked cows out that hadn't been treated if they'd been lame for 4, 6, 8 weeks. We do exactly the same thing. Does anybody like to hazard a guess what we find? Same thing? That's what I thought I was going to find. We find absolutely diddly squat. What we find is the vast majority of them are still lame 5 weeks after treatment. It really screams. Once you've left a cow to be even mildly lame for a number of weeks, they are very, very difficult to get right. It screams a message that Bristol first started talking about a few years ago, early and effective. If you're leaving your lame cows, I hate to have to tell you this, you're making life very, very difficult for yourself. Let me show you what happened on these 5 farms. So this is a side finding from the study. So we had 5 commercial farms, 1,100 cows in total. This is all the mobility scores for all the cows in the study, month on month through the study. So when we first started, across those 1,100 cows, 32% of them were identifiably lame, so about bang on national average. 4% of them were the 3s, so this is the 3A and the 3B at the top here, and then 28% of them were score 2s. The only thing that changed, as far as we know on these farms, is that we went in every 2 weeks, we mobility scored all the cows in the milking herd every 2 weeks, and we treated anything which had gone freshly lame. As you will appreciate, the farmers loved this study. All their lameness management just was handed over to us. That's what happened across the 1,100 cows over the 12 months of the study period. So the only thing that has changed is we've gone in, we've mobility scored every 2 weeks, and we've treated cows as soon as they became identifiably lame. By the end of the study, month 13, we were under 15% lame, so we'd halved the total number that were lame, and there was not a single 3B cow, the worst scoring category, in 1,100 cows on those 5 farms. And we weren't even treating the chronically lame ones. All we were doing was treating the fresh lame cows. If you treat your fresh lame cows, everything else disappears because you stop the escalator of them becoming your chronically lame cows. Yes?
Why do you think it went up?
Almost certainly just something that went on. Is that suitably not answering your question? Okay, I'm going to answer, but I'm going to put a health warning on it because it's not a criticism. One of the bigger farms in this study had all their cows hoof trimmed just about here. I'm not saying anything else. So, those 2 studies, plus a lot of other work that's been coming out over the last 5 years, everything is screaming to me that treating lameness is exactly the same as treating mastitis. If you want to keep on top of it as far as treatment is concerned, you need to think of your score 2 cows like you do cows which come in with clots in the parlour. You know you need to treat those as soon as they get clots, and you treat them with treatments which you know work because they've been demonstrated experimentally. That is how I think you need to think about your score 2 cows. And I appreciate that's not easy. I have this lovely ivory tower that I can retreat to at Nottingham. You can come and hurl things at me if you would like. But I can't stand here and lie because that is what all the research is saying. Personally, I think you should think of these score 3 cows in exactly the same way as you would your chronic high cell count cows or your sick, toxic cows. Yep, you can throw an awful lot of effort and treatment at them, but it's probably going to be hard work and in the long run an absolute waste of time, and therefore probably the best thing you can do is cull them and concentrate on these cows here. So, those are the 2 areas I wanted to talk about. I'll work on preventing these clawhorn lesions, and I'll work on treating these clawhorn lesions. In conclusion, that's how I think we should be thinking about the clawhorn lesions now. Part rumen acidosis. That doesn't mean for the nutritionists in the audience that I don't think acidosis is a really important and common condition. It is. I just don't think it's linked to lameness. If you want to know why fresh cow groups work so well, it's probably because you take all the pressure off the cows in the post-calving period when this is being slackened off, plus you give them all these lovely environments to get rid of all this pressure as well, and you probably limit the amount of condition score they lose to peak yield. So our work is suggesting that managing body condition score is absolutely key. I'm not suggesting we need to change the targets for body condition score. What I am suggesting is we need to work much, much harder to make sure as many cows as absolutely possible stay within targets. Because you know as well as I do, you can happily claim, yeah, 50, 60% of my cows stayed within target body condition score ranges. That means half of them didn't. And we're going to have more info on this in the next 6, 12, 18 months. We're going to try and come up with some firm recommendations for you to really have something to aim at. And on the treatment side, treating these score 2 cows as soon as they become lame, early and effective treatment appears to be the absolute key message for all the treatment work that we are doing, and it will deliver on farm. And clearly I genuinely appreciate having put my postgrads through the hell of delivering this protocol on farm. I do appreciate how difficult that is, mobility scoring every 2 weeks and treating everything straight away, but I can't stand here and lie and tell you that it won't work, because it does. I would particularly highlight that a very substantial portion of the work that I've described to you today is coming out of your levy, so thank you very much indeed. It is part of the Dairy Co research partnership which we run at Nottingham. But I would also highlight particularly these guys, the postgrads who work in our team, who work incredibly hard and get no credit because I'm the one who gets to stand here and talk about their work. But we also have other funders. Thank you very much. I would be very happy to argue the toss, take questions, or have tomatoes thrown at me if that's really what you think. We can talk about cheese as well if you want.
You talked about body condition score. What is your ideal body condition score post-calving?
So I'm quite comfortable. Again, I'd actually, this nutrition is not my key field, so I'm sure there are people with much more knowledge and much better opinions in the audience than me, but I don't think we need to go much further than what we currently recommend. 2.5 to 3 at drying off, 2.5 to 3 at calving, and a max half condition score point loss to peak yield. But for me, this is why, going back to one of those very early slides, why lameness is probably a disease associated with high production. High-yielding cows, particularly high-yielding Holstein cows, tend to lose more condition to peak, which makes them at greater risk. So it's trying to keep as many cows as you possibly can within that profile. That's going to be the skill.
You did mention that the fat pad consists mainly of monounsaturated fatty acids. Am I right?
Yes.
Now, in that case, do you think there's a chance of, say, dietary manipulation of the supplemental fat around that time to, say, enhance the supply of those type of fatty acids that could help, the animal from becoming lame?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So that point raises, I think, for me, two of the more scientific type solutions to this. One of them is absolutely that. Can we alter nutrition, add something to the diet which supports the fat pad so you don't get all this condition score loss from it? That would be one. The other one probably is also the genetic side, because it is highly likely that there are some lines of cows which vary how they mobilize their fat and where they mobilize it from. And it might well be that we can identify lines of cows which preferentially retain the fat in the fat pad. And it probably explains why there are some lines of cows that will milk like trains, lose loads of condition and never go lame. It's the two obvious things.
Hi, Rebecca Kirk from Holstein UK. You spoke about the weight-bearing activity on the foot. What level of impact do you think that the leg and foot anatomy, i.e. how straight and sickled the leg and foot angle is, on lameness and mobility?
Yeah, again, it's another one of those key questions, isn't it? Because it probably explains, again, the more genetic side of it. Really don't know. There's not a lot of work been done on it, so it's difficult to quantify. But it would make sense, again, wouldn't it, that some of the foot angles and weight distributions will have an impact. I'd love to be able to answer the question. I just can't, sorry. I'm working quite closely with a guy called Christoph Mulling, who works at the University of Leipzig, and they have this lovely setup where they can, in real time, radiograph the foot when the animal is walking. So they have cows walking on a treadmill and they fire an X-ray through the foot and they can look at what happens within the foot when the cow walks. He's only just getting that set up. I think that will be hugely informative over the next 5 years.
Rod Welford, local vet.
Hi, Rod.
When would you advocate or not advocate routine foot trimming with regard to the pathogenesis you've talked about?
Right. So again, this is where I really upset more people. So again, if you go to the research literature, there is basically no evidence whatsoever on when or how frequently we should be foot trimming. This is what I both love and hate about lameness. It's frightening that there is nothing out there. We have just completed our very first toe in the water study on this. It's gone into for publication this month. I'm afraid I can't talk about it. It's that sort of thing. Suffice to say that we know that's a deficit. We've voiced that to Dairyco. Dairyco know that's a deficit. I am hopeful that we can spend some more of your levy money in the future trying to work out what the best foot trimming routines are for you. We'll have 2 small studies coming out over the next 12 to 18 months. They won't help hugely. I'm hoping in the next 3 to 4 years we might have some proper, good quality information.
Hi, yeah, I was just going to say about that, about the routine foot trimming. I went on a Dutch 5-step method a few years ago, and I implemented on our farm 100 routine trimming at drying off period and 100 days post-calving. And I was just going to ask about that was our routine method, and knowing full well that you've actually prevented sole ulcers because you could see them coming. Was a great joy. I know it's quite sad, but I loved it.
It's not sad at all.
So I just wondering, I know you had said about treating stage 2 and stage 3, but what you thought about preventing, but obviously you've just...
So again, sorry, I probably wasn't very clear with the first question. Some trimming we know is probably a good thing. But again, it's like anything. What I want to know is absolutely nailed down what the best protocols are for you. Because I bet if we asked everybody in this audience what they are doing foot trimming wise, we wouldn't have any two people agreeing on it. And that's what we need to test. We need to find what the best type of foot trimming is, when it's best done, and how many times a year. So we know some trimming is definitely good. We just need to know the detail of it. Again, it's quite entertaining because this is not a criticism of Tucson Raven, but modern 5-step foot trimming was made up by a Dutch bloke in the 80s. It has now spread all over the world. It is now the standard foot trimming method in all developed nations dairy nations around the world, apart from now increasingly in America where they've tried to reinvent it, but still not tested it. And so we're just foot trimming based on a Dutch bloke from 30 years ago. It's not a criticism of Tucson Raven. We just need to find out what the best thing to do is. So I hope you'll appreciate that would be a good spend of your levy. If you disagree, please tell me.
John, Mike Bevan, Lanes Vets. Can you just explain why that sole ulcer appears in that particular place?
Yeah. So if we go, that's probably the one we want. So what I tried to do was just try and talk you through the generalities of why we get the disease in total. But you know as well as I do, we see more severe type lesions in some locations, and depending on farm and management, they appear in one or two other locations. But the absolute classic place is the sole ulcer site. So have we got this? Yeah, so sort of in this area, somewhere around here, the sole ulcer site, which is the classic site for the really bad lesions. Now, interestingly, if you look at the bones inside the foot over that area, so it's that part of the sole there where you can see this ulcer forming, it's where this tendon here, this is what's called the deep digital flexor tendon. It's what allows the cow to flick her foot backwards as she walks. It's what you do, exactly the same muscle and tendon that you use to do that with. And that tendon attaches to the back of the bone here. Now, virtually always, where a tendon attaches to a bone, you end up with a bony lump forming. And so the reason we probably see the worst type lesions here is for all of those reasons that I've talked about, but plus the fact there's a small bony lump there. And so that acts as a pressure point just at that location, which is why the worst lesions occur there. But the other thing that our work is suggesting, and this is what I'm hoping we'll be able to add, is we also think, and I'm not going to say a huge amount about it, we also think that the first case of lameness also causes bigger problems in this location. So once the cow has gone lame once, things change here, meaning she's much more likely to get other cases and worse cases again in the future. Exactly the same way as a high cell count cow. Once they've got that first bad case, most of them are probably screwed for life. Exactly the same thing.
Hi, John. Can I just ask you, we were talking about the fat pad.
Yep.
Are we better with these whole signs that are in all the time, matting everywhere? Will that prevent it?
So, if we go back to this one here. So, what you are desperately trying to do is pull these three circles as far apart as you possibly can and reduce the overall risk to the cow. Because if you get big areas of crossover amongst these different risk areas, you're going to see more lesions and more severe lesions in more cows on farm. So the environmental side remains absolutely key. So all the things in the Dairy Co Healthy Feet programme and all the other lameness control programmes around the world concentrate on trying to manage as best as possible these environmental risks to try and pull this circle as far away as possible. So it would be entirely logical that by putting matting in to soften that concussive blow, if this is a pressure injury, it would make a huge amount of sense. The challenge I have is if you are going to spend £30 per square metre fitted, adding up to many thousands of pounds on farm, can I hand on heart say that that is the best place to invest that money? You know, if you said to me, I've got 10,000 quid, 15,000 quid to put in rubber matting, I suspect on most units I could find a better way of investing 10 or 15 grand before I would put in rubber matting. But if everything else on your unit is absolutely bang on A1 and you've still got 10 to 15 grand to invest, absolutely, it makes an awful lot of sense. Does that suitably not answer the question?
Given everything you just said there, that bottom right-hand circle, is that not the most crucial one in regards to what you just said about the matting? If you provide the cow with everything she requires, like feed space, water space,
yep,
cubicles, then you'll practically eliminate everything.
Yeah, and that goes back. That's sort of the point, isn't it? Is if you could get this absolutely perfect on farm, you can probably afford not to care a hoot about this one and this one because all of this is absolutely bob on. But on most farms, I hope you probably agree that most farms that isn't the case. And all I'm suggesting is this one might be one of the really easy wins because there's many reasons why we should be controlling negative energy balance in early lactation and the rate and extent of body condition score loss. And I suspect that on a lot of units, attention to detail in that area will be a cheaper gain than some of the things here. But that's the balance we face. The next study I want to do is I want to go on randomly, it's again another farm random trial. So we take 40 farms, we randomly say on 20 of them, we are going to do everything we can to manage your body condition score loss. We'll put in programs, we'll monitor it for you, we'll work really hard to do that, to see overall what the gain is. Because if it's a massive gain, it's probably the one that we should be concentrating on most. And that's what our work is currently suggesting. If it's only a marginal gain, absolutely, in 5 years' time, I might be saying, yeah, forget it. Let's just invest in the infrastructure. It's a really good question.
Hi, John. The farms that you started doing the lameness work for, the mobility scoring and the foot trimming, did obviously it's hard to calculate out, but did they see any massive yield gains from the massively increased lameness?
I've never looked at the yield, I'm afraid, Charlie, because I don't think because we haven't got a control for it. If yield went up or down, we've no idea whether that was associated with the lameness or just because they had a good or bad year. So I've genuinely not looked at it. What is interesting, and it probably goes to show how practically it's difficult to implement, all of those farmers absolutely loved that. They were blown away by it, thought it was the best thing that ever happened to them. None of them have continued it once we stopped doing it for free. And that probably reflects the challenges of implementing it on farm, because I know the challenges that you face on farm in prioritizing these things, but they all absolutely recognize that it works. And so it's difficult, isn't it? Because if genuinely that is going to be really difficult to implement on farm practically, well, we have to go back to prevention.
Did you actually find any really fat cows that were kind of very deep individual conditions, but obviously more weight cows? Did you ever find any?
Haven't got that data through yet. We haven't looked. But it's a good point, isn't it? Because it has to be some sort of balance between fatness and weight, because it would be logical to assume that heavier cows are also worse off because it's just more pressure. It'll. Yeah, I'm sorry, absolutely, yes. And it's very easy to think that actually what we're talking about is not having thin cows. Actually, on most farms, it's not having fat cows because it's the fat cows that will crash.
John, did you only look at Holsteins or did you look at any other breeds?
All black and white, I'm afraid, James. Sorry for those of you who aren't black and white. I wondered how long it would take for somebody to put those two things together. I personally think I spend a long time thinking about cows. That's what my job is. I'm paid to think about cows. It's great. I increasingly think that this period, this management of transition through fresh, everything goes back to it. Everything falls off transition and fresh. There's very few common diseases that I routinely manage on farm that I can't pin back to transition and fresh management. And so getting transition and fresh management sorted and right, particularly in large, high-yielding herds, is going to be absolutely key. Whether you choose to use some of the pharmaceutical products which are available to support you in that area is entirely up to you and your veterinary surgeon.
I have one question of my own. Julia Morehouse from EBBC. You said earlier on that first lactation heifers had not got a fully developed fat pad. Is that age related, and therefore if you carve your heifers younger, could they be more susceptible to lameness?
I didn't talk about it because I tried to cover a lot of ground today, as you appreciate, and I know it's hard work, so I apologise. It's also roasting hot in here, isn't it? The bit I didn't talk about in one of the final studies is that one of the key risks we identified for the Royal Crichton heifers was calving late was a risk factor for a lifetime lameness history. So heifers which hit 2 years were at less risk of having a lifetime lameness history. So it appears like hitting 2 years is a really good thing. But that sort of doesn't add up, does it? Because what we're saying is that that doesn't sort of fit with the development of the fat pad. Interestingly, that work, and again I didn't talk about it, that work implies the risk factors for the first lameness event as a heifer are different for second lactation. So it is likely something different is happening. Can't answer it yet, sorry. But hit 2 years is another key message from that work. Again, there's the very strong opinions on what type of blocks people should be using. I was delighted to get funding just to do the very first of those treatment studies. There's a million things we could do from here, not least of which is start testing. If we're saying block and non-steroidal is good in freshly lamed cows, which is what that work says, we now need to mess around with which blocks, which non-steroidals, how much, how long, because the other thing is how long do we leave blocks on for? Does anybody actively take blocks off cows, or do you just leave them on until they fall off? Good. Yeah, and there's some work, and I'm sure many of you will recognise this. Cows don't like walking on blocks, and certainly over weeks, certainly the wooden ones, they wear them unevenly, and then actually they become more lame because they're walking on a block. We absolutely would now recommend taking blocks off at 4 weeks. I know it's another intervention, but it really probably is worth it. We need more work. People are developing all sorts of blocks out there currently.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much for the very interesting presentation there, John.